So Bernie Sanders unveiled his wealth tax proposal. Now, Warren had rolled it out in this general election first. However, Bernie had a version of this that he proposed in 2014. So he's always been in favor of a wealth tax. This is just when he's rolling it out for the primary election. Okay. Now you're not going to be surprised to hear this, guys. Bernie's goes further than Elizabeth Warren. Take a look. This is in Vox. Here's how it would work. Sanders wants to levy a 1% tax on wealth above $32 million for married couples, and then slowly increase the tax for wealthier households. A 2% for wealth between 50 to 250 million, 3% for wealth from 250 to 500 million, 4% from 500 million to 1 billion, 5% from 1 to 2.5 billion, 6% from 2.5 to 5 billion, 7% from 5 to 10 billion, and 8% on wealth over 10 billion. Same thing goes for super rich single people, except the wealth thresholds are cut in half. In other words, an unmarried person with 16.5 million in wealth would pay a $5,000 tax, as would a married couple with 32.5 million in net worth. With more brackets for individuals and families, Sanders' proposal is estimated to raise $1.6 trillion more in revenue than Warren's plan over 10 years, whereas Warren's plan has the same thresholds for individuals and married couples, which could enable some wealthy couples to evade the tax by getting divorced. Sanders' plan closes that loophole. So Warren's plan is a 2% tax on households with assets over $50 million, okay? And Bernie's is, let's repeat it here, just so everybody understands the difference. Bernie's is a 1% tax on wealth above $32 million. So it kicks in at, Bernie's plan kicks in at $32 million, and Elizabeth Warren's plan kicks in at $50 million. Okay, so his kicks in at a lower threshold, and that threshold is $32 million. And his plan is more progressive in the sense that it's a graduated scale. So the more you make, the higher percentage you pay. That's very similar to literally the progressive income tax system we have, where the more money you make, the higher you pay nominally. So hers is more of a flat wealth tax, where it's like, here's the tax, and it's for everything above this line, and that's it. He says, no, we're not going to kick it in at 50 million, we're going to kick it in at 32 million, and we're going to graduate the scales, so the more you make, the more you pay. Now, so Elizabeth Warren, just so everybody knows, because I think this is really important when talking about the wealth tax, is how few people this impacts, which is a good thing. I'd say that's a good thing, because, and you guys know, I'm second to none in my lefty credentials. But I've always said I've never met, a middle-class tax cut I didn't like, because those are the people who need relief. Middle-class families need relief, and poor people need relief. I'm in favor of tax cuts for those folks because they need it. It would help them. I'm in favor of cutting their taxes and also giving them more services, so that means redistribute more by taxing the wealthy. So the fact that it impacts few people is a good thing. So think about it. We have over, 320 million people in this country? You know how many people these wealth tax would hit? Elizabeth Warren's only hits the richest 75,000 families. It's nothing. It's nothing. We have how many subscribers here on Secular Talk? Over 700,000? 75,000 families. So the richest of the richest, 75,000. Bernie's only hits 180,000. So it's more than Elizabeth Warren's, but it's still reasonable. And Bernie's would raise $4.35 trillion over the next decade. And that money would go into all the things that you want it to go into, including healthcare and many other things. Now, I want to give you some more specifics here. This is Warren Gunnels, who's Bernie's policy director. By the way, super underrated, because he should have way more followers than he has, because he's a policy machine. You think I'm a policy machine? Go follow Warren Gunnels on Twitter and have fun, because he'll take you for a policy ride on a daily basis. Highly recommended. So under Bernie's plan, this is how much more these billionaires would owe this year. The Walton family, $14.8 billion. Jeff Bezos, $8.9 billion. Charles Koch, $3.2 billion. Sheldon Adelson, $2.6 billion. Rupert Murdoch, $1.28 billion. Now, Bernie tweeted something along the lines of, billionaires shouldn't exist. And it was hilarious because there were some people on Twitter who went into like a frenzy and they were doing that. Remember, that Holocaust saying of like, first they came for these people and I didn't say anything because I wasn't that. They were doing that with billionaires. First we came for the billionaires and I didn't speak out. Like, okay, no, you're not getting the gist here. He's not throwing them in a concentration camp. He's raising their taxes slightly. Now, just to put this in perspective for everybody, because I think this is important. Even though he's saying, oh, billionaires shouldn't exist, his wealth plan does not make that, it doesn't make that the case. So, if it's theoretically possible to say, we're going to tax all assets over 1 billion that somebody has. Now, it's a little tough in terms of how you do it, because are you talking like income and bank accounts, or are you talking also like shares of a business that they might own? Because that gets a little squirrely. Like, what if they keep the wealth in the business, but it's technically theirs? How do you tax, somebody, does like the government own the shares of the stocks if they keep it in stock? You see what I'm saying? So it gets a little squirrely if you say, take everything over $1 billion, but it is theoretically possible to craft a tax where it's 100% tax of all wealth over $1 billion. You could have like effectively, we have a minimum wage. You could effectively have like a maximum asset cap, a maximum net worth cap of $1 billion. But that's not what he's calling for. In fact, his plan is significantly more moderate than that in this sense. Here's what the effective situation would be. Bernie's wealth tax would cut in half the wealth of the typical billionaire after 15 years. So, stop and think about this, dude. I think this is so important, and this is why a lot of the commentary about this in right-wing circles is just, in my opinion, the dumbest stuff I've ever read in my life. Is that, so right now, right this second, how much is Jeff Bezos worth? He's worth about $110 billion. So that means after Bernie Sanders' oh-so-evil tax over 10 years, he would have about $55 billion. Are you seriously going to sit there and pretend like a man who has $55 billion, woe is him, he's some sort of victim? See, that's why I've always said, talking about taxes in the sense of like, well, this is how much the government is taking, that's so incredibly misleading, because it just totally leaves not in the conversation, well, how much do they still have? That seems kind of important, doesn't it? So I submit to you, nobody can really work that much harder than anybody else. Did he really work hard enough to get $110 billion? At the same time, we have people who are going bankrupt for medical bills? Really? 76% of the countries live in paycheck to paycheck? And I'm supposed to feel bad because this dude's got $55 billion after this tax kicks in? Get out. See, that's the point. Get out of here. We don't live in a meritocracy. So stop pretending like all these billionaires, like they earn that money, really? They worked that much harder. Jeff Bezos, there's a janitor out there somewhere making $45K a year. Did Jeff Bezos work, his net worth is $110 billion. That much more? The janitor's net worth could be, when you factor in expenses and all that stuff, maybe the dude is in debt. Maybe he's worth nothing. So that dude's worth zero. Jeff Bezos is worth $110 billion. That makes sense? That's a system based on merit? Some of the hardest working people I've ever met in my life are working people, and they're living at or below the poverty line. There's a dude I know, his name's Kevin. Back when we were in high school, he worked 3 jobs. He's one of the hardest working people I've ever seen in my life. Again, living at or below the poverty line. We don't live in a meritocracy. It's not that the harder you work, the further you go. That's not the way it works. So to have a tax and then, yes, redistribute that wealth to priorities that all make sense, that's the most reasonable thing I've ever heard in my life. And Bernie Sanders' proposal is way more moderate than even I would expect out of Bernie Sanders. All he's doing is taking Jeff Bezos' $110 billion and letting him keep $55 billion. Bezos should be thanking Bernie for that. In fact, some of the commentary on the left was like, this is actually a little softer than I thought Bernie would go. But yeah, man, hey, we're easing into this here. That makes perfect sense to me. No, he's not a victim. No, everything's going to be okay for the billionaires. There's people out there who have $10 billion. After this takes effect, they'll still have $5 billion. I'm not going to feel bad for that person. $5 billion they have. They definitely didn't even work hard enough to get that $5 billion, but he's letting them keep the $5 billion. Again, it's so funny to me how the spectrum is so in such an insane direction that many people would be more comfortable. As soon as we get the first trillionaire, they're going to be more comfortable with that existing than if we said, hey, you max out at $1 billion. Do you have any idea how much $1 billion is? You couldn't spend that if you wanted to. It's not possible. $1 billion! $1 billion! Take 100 million 10 times. That's $1 billion! That's insane! You can't even spend $100 million. And Jeff Bezos is going to have $55 billion, and some idiots are like, oh my God. First they came for the billionaires. I like the plan. I think it's a very reasonable plan, a very moderate plan. And again, you got nothing to worry about, dog. None of us have anything to worry about. Okay? It's not going to impact you. Not even close. Warren's kicks in over $50 million. Bernie Sanders kicks in over $32 million for a married couple. $16 million for an individual. And again, the tax is super low for that. Like if somebody out there is worth $20 million. Let's say we have one Secular Talk viewer who somehow managed to amass $20 million. First of all, congratulations. Second of all, yeah, this would impact you if you're single, but it would be so tiny that you wouldn't even feel it. Like the idea of a wealth tax is brilliant. I love it. And I love it especially because the way it's crafted, it sounds so moderate when in reality it's a very solid left-wing proposal. Like Warren's was 2% over $50 million. But see, it's 2%, I believe, of assets, like of net worth. So, and there's no way to escape it. So even though it's only 2%, that's awesome. But that adds up, and it ends up working well for the projects that we need to fund in order to make our system not objectively suck, like healthcare, like education, so on and so forth. So anyway, I love it. Wealth taxes are my new favorite thing, and I think this is an incredibly reasonable, moderate tax. It's way more aggressive than Elizabeth Warren's, but still, that's not saying much. The question that I think is fascinating, which I've posed to you guys before, is where do you stand on the issue of having that you cap at $1 billion? I think that's a reasonable line. And you chain it to inflation, so whatever. 200 years from now, that $1 billion is now $3.2 billion or whatever. But I think that's a reasonable conversation where, people they cap out. I hit my maximum $1 billion because they're fine. They're going to be okay. They're going to be okay. Like, people really don't grasp how big $1 billion really is. So that's the reasonable conversation in my mind. We have a minimum wage, why not have a maximum net worth cap, maximum asset cap, $1 billion? That, I think, is a reasonable conversation. This comes nowhere near that, but I still think it's a good proposal because it's the most aggressive proposal, and even the aggressive proposal is really moderate.